I was 22 when my father died, an old man worn down by years who never complained, even when his hands trembled from arthritis and his breath came in short. Painful bursts. He was a watchmaker, not just a craftsman, but an artist who could hear the rhythm of time the way a musician hears melody. On the day of his funeral, I held in my hand an old pocket watch, with an engraving on the back, "To my son. When time no longer needs me." It was the last thing he ever gave me, just one day before he passed. I remember the way he smiled as he handed it to me, that quiet, tired smile that somehow carried all the love he'd never put into words. "Take care of it, Tom," he said softly. "It's all I have left to give you." That watch became my most precious possession. I carried it everywhere through my years in college, through the first apartment I could barely afford, through heartbreaks and new beginnings. It wasn't just an object, it was a heartbeat, a reminder that my father's time still ticked beside mine. But life, as I would learn, has a cruel way of testing what we value most. When I lost my job in the late 90s, I had to move back to my small hometown. My mother had passed 2 years earlier, and our old house had been sold to a new family. All I had left of my parents was that watch tucked safely in a wooden box, hidden behind my books. That's when I met her again, Margaret, the neighbor I'd grown up next to. She was in her 40s then, with the same sharp tongue and self-satisfied smirk I remembered from childhood. She'd always been the type to gossip about everyone else's problems, but never look at her own. When I came back, she was renting me a small room in her house. I was grateful at first. She smiled when I moved in, told me she'd help me get back on my feet. "You've always been like a son to me, Tom," she said. But even then, something about the way she looked at my things, like she was measuring their worth, made me uneasy. Still, I needed a roof. I needed time, and time, ironically, was what she would steal from me. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that feels quiet for no reason. I'd been out most of the day looking for work, returning home tired and hopeful, clutching a handful of job applications. When I opened the door to my small rented room, I noticed right away something was wrong. The box, the one that held my father's watch, wasn't on the shelf where I'd left it. At first I told myself maybe I'd moved it. Maybe I'd been careless. I tore through the drawers, the desk, the closet, even checked my jacket pockets, my bag, everywhere. But deep down I already knew. Someone had been in my room. When I stepped out into the kitchen, Margaret was sitting there at the table, sipping her tea like a queen, pretending not to notice me. I asked her, trying to stay calm, "Did you go into my room?" She blinked, slow and deliberate. "Why would I do that, Tom?" I stared at her. My watch is gone. Her lips curled slightly, that same smirk she always had when she knew more than she wanted to admit. "A watch?" she said. "Oh, you mean that old thing? I thought it was junk." He left it out. My chest tightened. "What did you do with it?" She looked me straight in the eye and said, without a flicker of remorse, "I sold it. To the pawn shop on Main Street. Got $20 for it." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My father's watch, the only thing I had left of him, was gone. Sold for $20. "You had no right," I managed to say. My voice was shaking. She shrugged, standing up, brushing imaginary dust off her blouse. "If it mattered that much, you shouldn't have left it lying around. You owe me rent, remember? Consider it payment." Her words burned. I wanted to scream, to grab something, anything, but all I did was walk out. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely open the door. Outside, the world looked the same, cars passing, kids playing, but inside me, something cracked. That night, I went to the pawn shop. The owner, an old man with tired eyes, remembered it. "Sold it an hour ago," he said, apologetic. "Guy bought it for a gift. Said it looked special." I asked who. Begged even, but he just shook his head. No name, no receipt, and that was it. The last piece of my father gone forever. That night I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my empty hands, whispering to myself it's just a watch. But it wasn't. It was my father's voice. His time, his memory, and she had traded all of that for $20. After that day, I stopped going to Margaret's house. I avoided the streets near hers, the markets where she shopped, even the small park where I used to see her sitting with that smug expression. But the image of her standing there, calm and untouchable, haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her shrug, heard her words echoing, "Considerate payment." I knew something had changed in me that afternoon. The boy who had once believed in fairness, in kindness, was gone. In his place was a new determination, quiet, patient, almost invisible, but powerful. I wasn't going to fight her that day, not physically, not with anger. I needed something bigger. That evening, I packed a small bag, the few clothes I owned, a notebook filled with my father's sketches, and a photo of him wearing that watch. I left a note for the landlord explaining that I had found work in another city. I didn't look back. The streetlights of my old neighborhood flickered behind me like fading memories. For months, I wandered from city to city, taking odd jobs, delivery driver, warehouse assistant, construction laborer. Every time I had a few dollars, I saved them. Not for myself. For the day I could right the wrongs done to me. For the day I could finally reclaim what was stolen. Along the way, I learned things about people, about trust, about how easily someone can disguise greed with a smile. I realized that Margaret wasn't just cruel, she was clever, calculating, and most dangerous of all, confident in her impunity. That confidence had to be dismantled. Every night I traced the watch in my mind. I imagined its face, its golden hands, the small scratch near the crown my father had accidentally left when teaching. Mita winded. I knew I couldn't replace it, but I could reclaim my dignity. I could restore the balance. And then, I thought that scared me almost as much as it excited me. If I can turn my life around, if I can grow stronger, if I can learn to see the world in ways she never could, one day I will not only buy back the watch, I will buy back everything she thought she had taken from me. That promise became my mantra. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would. And with that knowledge, I finally felt a spark of calm. The anger was still there, but now it was a tool, not a poison. By the time I finally returned to the city where Margaret still lived, I wasn't the same person who had left. I was sharper, more patient, more deliberate. I walked streets that once made me feel small and powerless, with a confidence that surprised even me. I had learned the art of quiet planning, of waiting for the right moment, of letting someone's arrogance become their undoing. And Margaret? She had no idea what was coming. Returning to the city felt surreal. The streets were the same, yet everything looked smaller, less intimidating. The corner shop where Margaret bought her groceries still stood, and the little cafe, where she sipped coffee with her friends, had the same faded awnings. It was like stepping into a memory, a place frozen in time, waiting for me to act. I didn't rush. Patience was my ally now. I spent days observing her routine from a distance when she left the house. Which store she visited first? Which neighbors noticed her arrival? Every small detail mattered. Every casual glance, every door opened or closed, became part of a mental map I built meticulously. Margaret's confidence was still intact, but I could see cracks forming, the slight hesitation before she entered a crowded street, the way she checked her mailbox more often than necessary. I reminded myself why I was here. The watch, though simple in value, had been a symbol of betrayal, a tangible reminder that some people could act without conscience. But my goal wasn't just the watch. It was justice, balance, and proving to both of us that patience and persistence could outweigh arrogance. I began reaching out subtly, old friends of my father, acquaintances who might remember the watch, people who had dealings with Margaret over the years. Carefully, I reconstructed her financial and personal landscape. Margaret had expanded, invested in property, and grown wealthier. The irony was not lost on me. She had spent a lifetime thinking she could profit from deceit. Yet here I was, armed with knowledge, strategy, and resolve. Every night I returned to my small apartment with maps, notes, and observations scattered across the table. I traced paths, plotted encounters, and visualized each interaction. This wasn't a revenge born of impulse. It was a precise operation. I imagined conversations, imagined her surprise, imagined the shock when she realized the boy she had dismissed had not only grown up, but learned to wield patience like a weapon. I also had to grow in ways beyond planning. I polished my financial knowledge, learned investment strategies, and began acquiring property quietly, ensuring every step I took brought me closer to the day I could confront her. It was a slow accumulation, an invisible rise. Months passed. Margaret's confidence remained strong, yet unseen. My foundation grew. I became invisible, a shadow moving behind the scenes. The thrill of anticipation mingled with fear, the fear that I might falter, that my plan could be discovered, that years of preparation could collapse in a single misstep. But I pressed on. Every setback became a lesson, every small victory a reminder that time and patience were on my side. And in the quiet moments, when the city slept and the streetlights flickered against the night sky, I held the image of the watch in my mind, the one thing that had ignited this journey, and smiled. The first step was subtle. I didn't announce my presence or confront Margaret immediately. That would have been reckless, a blunder that could undo years of planning. Instead, I began acquiring small properties in the same neighborhood, slowly embedding myself into the local real estate network. Each purchase was deliberate, calculated, and anonymous. I wasn't just buying property. I was buying influence, visibility, and leverage. Margaret, of course, remained unaware. She continued her daily routines, blissfully confident, as if the world revolved around her. It was almost laughable. The way she strutted down the streets, waving to acquaintances, ignoring the quiet changes happening in the shadows. Every time I passed her house on my way to inspect a new property, I studied its structure, its weaknesses, the subtle hints of neglect that only a careful observer could notice. The legal groundwork had to be perfect. I consulted lawyers under false pretenses, asking about inheritance rights, property loopholes, and tax codes, all without revealing my true objective. Each conversation added another layer to my strategy, another safeguard against potential mistakes. I wanted no loose ends. The goal wasn't just to reclaim what was lost. It was to do it in a way that was unassailable. Then came the psychological element. I started planting subtle signs of presence, a rare book left on a nearby shelf, a neighbor mentioning a new investor, whispers of someone who had returned from afar to settle old scores, nothing overt, nothing confrontational, just enough to create a faint ripple of uncertainty. Margaret, though still confident, began showing tiny cracks, hesitation at meetings, a slightly more cautious approach to decisions, a glance over her shoulder where none was necessary. I also revisited memories of the past. The watch, though gone, remained vivid in my mind. Its loss had been a sharp, bitter lesson. But now, each detail of Margaret's life was a puzzle piece in a larger picture, a picture that I was assembling with care, precision, and patience. As the weeks passed, my actions became more pronounced. I acquired a property directly across from hers, not to intimidate, but to observe. From this vantage point, I watched her comings and goings, her interactions with neighbors, her seemingly perfect routine. I documented everything, every conversation, every transaction. Every smile and frown became part of a dossier I was building. Despite the meticulous planning, there was an underlying tension that gnawed at me. Each step forward carried risk. A wrong purchase, a misstep in observation, a careless word. Any of it could alert her. Yet the risk fueled me, sharpened my focus. I reminded myself this wasn't vengeance born of anger. It was a reclamation born of justice, patience, and intellect. By the end of the month, the first tangible moves were complete. I had a foothold, influence, and insight. Margaret's first hint of unease came not from confrontation, but from a subtle shift in her environment. I had orchestrated it carefully, small, seemingly random events that would gradually undermine her sense of control. A forgotten delivery at her doorstep, a sudden inspection by a local council officer, a rumor that a new investor had moved into the neighborhood. Each incident alone was trivial, but together they began to ripple through her carefully constructed world. She didn't speak of it at first. I watched from my vantage point across the street as she paused, looked around, fidgeted with the drapes of her living room window. Her posture was still proud, but the confidence I had once mocked was giving way to uncertainty. I could see her mind working, probing for explanations, but never fully uncovering the source. That was the point, to unsettle without revealing the puppeteer behind the strings. I continued my quiet maneuvers. I attended community meetings under another name, subtly influencing opinions about local development and property management. Margaret was present, unaware that some of the whispers she overheard and casual advice she received were indirectly my own. Every conversation she engaged in, every decision she made, I mapped and recorded. Slowly, she was being drawn into a web she could not see. At home, I reviewed the documents I had gathered, Margaret's financial records, her legal agreements, and her past property transactions. All contained small inconsistencies and vulnerabilities. Nothing overt, nothing illegal, just enough to give me leverage if the moment arrived. I wasn't looking for sabotage. I was waiting for the right time to reclaim what had been wrongfully taken. Margaret's behavior began to change. She started locking doors more securely, double-checking her mailbox, and scanning her surroundings as she walked. Neighbors whispered about her nervousness, but none suspected why. Even her closest friends noticed her distraction. Every sign of anxiety validated my careful planning and reinforced my patience. I also revisited the memory of the watch, imagining how Margaret must have felt when she sold it, and how oblivious she was to the depth of the betrayal she had inflicted. That memory fueled my resolve. This was no longer about a single item of value. It was about justice, about balancing the scales that life had skewed in her favor. The first direct interaction was approaching. A community event would soon bring her into proximity with my influence. I had prepared carefully, rehearsing scenarios and predicting her reactions. Every detail mattered, my tone, my words, even the expressions on my face. The stage was set, and she would be none the wiser that the pieces were moving around her. The weeks of careful preparation had begun to pay off. Margaret was no longer simply uneasy. She was defensive, cautious, and visibly agitated. Every interaction she had in the neighborhood, every phone call, every glance outside her window seemed tinged with suspicion. I had created a delicate web of influence, one that her mind couldn't yet trace, and now the strands were tightening around her. I arrived at the community fundraiser under the guise of a friendly neighbor. The room was filled with familiar faces, and Margaret was there, seated near the back, scanning the room with nervous energy. She didn't notice me immediately. I had timed my entry perfectly. I allowed her a few moments of composure before I engaged, greeting her warmly, as though nothing had ever occurred between us. Her eyes flickered in recognition, but her posture remained rigid, defensive. Small talk began innocuously. I asked after her health, her recent travels, her involvement in local projects. Each question seemed harmless, but beneath the surface, it was probing, testing, pushing. I noticed her responses became shorter, clipped, as if she was carefully weighing each word. Her confidence, once so imposing, was cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Later, as the evening progressed, I subtly shifted the conversation toward property values and estate planning. I shared stories of a local investor who had quietly turned forgotten homes into profitable ventures. Margaret's interest was piqued, though she tried to hide it, masking curiosity with polite disinterest. Every anecdote I recounted, every piece of information I casually dropped, nudged her closer to the realization that she might be vulnerable. I could see her mind racing. She began to ask pointed questions, but they were indirect, almost distracted. "Do you think properties like that ever change hands quietly?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I smiled, giving nothing away. The subtle fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She was beginning to sense that there was more to the story, that someone, somewhere, was quietly orchestrating events that now touched her world. That night, I left the fundraiser and reflected on the progress I had made. Margaret's composure was fragile, her certainty shaken. I had created a situation where she was reacting without understanding the cause, a perfect alignment for the final act. The neighborhood, once her comfortable stage, was now subtly shifting beneath her feet, and I controlled the currents. I also revisited my own emotions. This was no longer about the watch or the past injustice alone. It was about proving that integrity and patience could triumph over arrogance and betrayal. I had the power to restore balance, to reclaim what had been denied. But I intended to do it with precision, not malice. Every step forward was calculated, every move deliberate. The day had arrived. 10 years of patience, subtle planning, and quiet strategy had led to this final chapter. Margaret was unaware that the world she had comfortably controlled for so long was about to shift beneath her feet. I had everything in place, the timing, the circumstances, and the emotional weight necessary to bring the story full circle. I approached the real estate agent's office as if on a casual visit. The agent, unaware of the deeper history, led me to the house that had once belonged to Margaret. Its exterior had aged, the paint faded and windows slightly clouded. A stark reminder that time waits for no one. I walked through the rooms slowly, absorbing each detail, imagining the echoes of the past mingling with the present. Every step was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the years lost and the opportunity regained. Margaret received the news of my offer with disbelief. She had assumed the house was untouchable, her security unquestioned. But reality had a way of challenging assumptions. When I spoke to her over the phone, my tone was calm, courteous, but imbued with quiet authority. I offered fair terms, nothing extravagant, yet the underlying message was unmistakable. The balance of the past was now being acknowledged. She hesitated, her voice betraying a mixture of fear, anger, and reluctant respect. I can't believe you're serious, she said, her words fragmented, unsure. I allowed a gentle pause before replying. I've waited long enough. It's time to set things right for both of us. The negotiations concluded swiftly. Margaret, realizing the inevitability of the situation, accepted. The transfer of ownership was completed with precision, each signature a symbolic closure of a decade-old chapter. Standing in the living room of what was once her domain, now mine, I felt an unexpected wave of clarity. Victory was not a triumph of malice, but a restoration of balance. I didn't gloat, nor did I seek to humiliate. Instead, I reflected on the journey, on patience, strategy, and the quiet assertion of justice. Margaret's disbelief lingered, a subtle acknowledgement of the power of time and persistence. The watch, once sold thoughtlessly, had sparked a ripple that would echo far longer than either of us could have anticipated. Walking through the house, I remembered my father's lessons about dignity and integrity. Each room, each corner, carried memories both personal and inherited. I realized that justice often takes time, but when guided by patience and precision, it arrives in forms more meaningful than immediate retaliation. Margaret, in the end, had only herself to contend with the choices she had made, the arrogance she had displayed, and the eventual recognition that life has a way of restoring equilibrium.